Kevin. Dave, a little about Devicescape.
Thanks, John. I'm Dave Fraser. I'm the CEO of Devicescape. There's no slide to show you. So what we do is we help service providers integrate Wi-Fi into their overall network strategies. And in particular, we try to do two things. We try and provide, help the operator provide their customer with an always best connected experience. And secondly, we help the operator monetize the entire data experience, not just the cellular component that they've cared about typically in the past. In particular, we like to help people grow mobile data. One of the unusual, maybe contradictory things is that providing great Wi-Fi service actually encourages and promotes the use of mobile data too. And uniquely, what Devicescape does is provide a virtual carrier Wi-Fi network, in fact, an extremely large 20 million hotspot Wi-Fi network that they can use to integrate into their overall strategies.
Excellent, thank you. Michael?
My name is Michael Minkevhice. I'm VP of Technology Services at Luxoft. We are a global software house headquartered in Switzerland, listed at New York Stock Exchange. There's around 8,000 people scattered across 2,000 of engineering centers around the world. Telecommunications and data networking are among our key focus verticals. We cover pretty much the entire technology stack for core and access network, and in addition to that, we've been investing quite heavily into building our own IP portfolio in the emerging fast-growing areas like SDN, NFV, and Internet of Things. Here I'd like to share with you one of the stories related to bringing to the market one of those products. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Kevin?
Sure. Kevin DeNuccio, longtime telecom veteran at Verizon and the telecom business at Cisco. Sold my public company, Violin Networks, to Ericsson. Spent a lot of time in the space. Violin Memory is a New York Stock Exchange company, about $100 million in revenue, growing at 40 or 50% annually. We pioneered the high-end enterprise flash storage marketplace, so leveraged the high-volume economics that were created by the mobile device world, using flash for storage in phones, tablets, next-gen laptops, and created a very high-end device for large enterprises, cloud providers, to essentially remove what was the big bottleneck in the data center. If you look at network compute and storage is causing most of the latency in the application environments of today. And we basically, by using flash and removing the hard disk drives out of the equation, you can take today's applications and run them on this kind of infrastructure, and it dramatically improves latency, getting usually an order of magnitude increase in performance. So we've had a large impact on the telecom space, primarily in a few areas. One, analytics, as network analytics and big data, and trying to understand what's happening with the network on a real-time basis. We run a lot of those kind of number crunching kind of environments to really get all of the network knowledge into the hands that people can do something about it. In billing applications where all the money's made, and in really accelerating billing or creating new ways to bill, and really generating new kinds of revenue, profitability, efficiency. And lastly, around clouds, whether that's building private clouds for enterprises, hybrid clouds that can mix into the public clouds that telcos are building, or helping them build their public clouds themselves. So high-end data storage and kind of removing the latency that flash provides versus hard disk drive. Very disruptive technology to the data center, creating great opportunities.
Thank you. And one Greg Franklin has been talking about very verbally in the council for many years. So if you've been in the council, you've probably heard Greg talk about Violin Memory at some point. Someone in carrier business development will probably see 300 to 500 companies a year. The take rate is about 1%. I'll footnote Rob Hull as the source of that quote. Rob, we're talking about you. So in a way, you made it through the gauntlet. It's a very narrow funnel that actually gets deployed by an operator. So I was wondering if you talk a bit about the hook or the catalyst that kind of got you from something that's sort of on the wide funnel all the way through. So Dave, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Sure. We started marketing our service perhaps 3-4 years ago, and then the issue was really about Wi-Fi offload. So the hook for us was actually how dramatic the problems were at that time. Particularly to our first customer was Metro PCS actually, so a tier 2 operator with the challenge of launching their very first smartphone with a relatively weak network. So I would say that much as I would like to say that Devicescape did a great job in creating our product, I think the hook for us was actually the urgency of the situation with congestion and with unlimited data plans and so on. It became a real challenge. Having said that though, the world has moved on from there. Wi-Fi offload to us is actually a use case, but not really the main use case these days. With LTE networks and with shared data plans, it's actually moved on to monetization, and Wi-Fi can be viewed by service providers in a number of different ways. It can be viewed as a threat just as much as it is an opportunity. So the initial hook was Wi-Fi offload, but these days it's all about actually monetizing the entire data experience. 80% of the traffic that smartphone users utilize actually comes to them over the Wi-Fi network, and it seems really outrageous that service providers don't participate in that, typically don't take any ownership, they don't monetize it. And so our role has shifted from that, the initial urgent days of offload into helping monetize Wi-Fi.
Great. Kevin, I'll turn to you. I'll reframe the question, which was, you were doing something else and said, oh, wait, there's a wireless market. And actually, I think that applies to Dave also. You had another business well before selling to operators. So you were minding your own business in this other market, and suddenly you saw a hook. And if you could speak to what that hook was and why you went with sort of the GSMA, for example, as a first sort of path to market.
Yeah, so for us, I mean, historically, it had always been very expensive for a spammer to set up shop on a mobile carrier and start to send SMS messages out, because it would cost on the order of 10 to 25 cents a message to send a message out. You had to send out millions and millions of messages in order to get a small take rate and be able to try and sell some product or service. That wasn't a very financially viable offering for them. So as we saw mobile carriers start to change their business models and be more data forward and not emphasize so much the voice minutes and the mobile messaging packages, and those elements within the pricing strategy for the operators started to become cheaper, going towards free, included with every single package. That was the hook for us. I mean, we saw that as things were getting cheaper, the mobile carrier and the users of the mobile carrier would be the next prime target for folks who are trying to sell services in the same fashion that they do with email-based spam. So as folks were beginning to send more and more spam messages via SMS channels, we started to see that in specific regions, especially where carrier networks weren't as locked down as in other locations, and allowed more spoofing and other types of problems within the mobile environment. So that was our hook to try and jump into this market. We saw it as a greenfield opportunity and something that we wanted to chase after. However, we didn't have that many direct mobile customers ourselves. We worked with a couple of the large ones in North America, but mostly on the email side of things, and so that was the AT&Ts, Verizons, and those sorts of folks. So we essentially took the change in the pricing model as a indicator that we should probably start ramping up and start building something for the mobile carrier.
Okay. But in a way, you had carrier sockets already, or ISP sockets, I should be specific, so with fixed line carriers. So were you able to tap through that from the fixed side of the house to the wireline side, or was this really the wireless side, which is kind of a full start?
In some regions, yeah, we definitely were able to leverage existing relationships within those companies, but in other regions where there wasn't as much crossover, it was basically starting from scratch, not having contacts or history working with those types of companies, that's where we started to look around and figure out how we might be able to partner with somebody who could get us introductions to
So, and then, Michael, I wasn't familiar with you before this. You have a huge who's who client list, ranging from Boeing to IBM to Hotwire to Ford. So, you had a diversified business prior to going with mobile. But what was it that you saw? And then you specifically mentioned that you've partnered with network equipment providers as a go-to-market rather than selling direct. I wonder if you can speak to that process and sort of what led you to working with, say, Spirent, for example.
Right. So, for historical reasons, we started as a product engineering partner for large network equipment manufacturers like now defunct Nortel Networks, Avaya, Juniper, Ixia, Ericsson, and we had to deal with a lot of different best work. So you would argue that it's not the most exciting part of software development. It's some mundane stuff, but somebody got to do it.
There's honor in that work.
Yeah, we are by nature of our engagement, we communicated quite intensely with different carriers, and we saw pretty much the same picture. All of them have some kind of internal R&D or test labs scattered across different cities and sometimes different continents. And in the best case scenario, they had some homegrown testing networks. And in the worst case scenario, just a collection of different testing scripts ranging from hundreds to thousands, poorly maintained and poorly documented, and overall, each side wanted to come up with their own version written from scratch, less than 40% reuse in general. And it looked like a very interesting opportunity. So we decided to build our own comprehensive test execution framework that covers pretty much the entire product life cycle with modular architecture, fully customizable, integrated with different mark tracking tools, and easily extendable. And this is what we've got after 1 year effort. But then we had to bring our solution to the market somehow. And given the very conservative nature of carriers and overall well-established partner ecosystem, we thought that for us the best approach would be to partner with some established player. And this is how we are identified Spirent communication as Spirent, a recognizable player in the test and measurement area as our partner. So it was a good chemistry between our companies, and we are integrated our solution called Twister with their STC, Spirent test bench, and iTest dashboard. And we jointly approached carriers, and that strategy proved to be working.
That's great. So then, Kevin, I may have a biased view, just haven't heard so much from Greg and his view for a bunch of parts over the years, but was the wireless industry really part of the thesis in founding the company, or was it more you saw an opportunity there and sort of tapped towards that?
Yeah. So I think it really centers around scale. So when you think of storage being the bottleneck or creation of a lot of latency that exists in data centers, it's really about scale. So it really is because we start at the top of the pyramid today. We have 300 of the top 500 global 500 accounts in the world in all verticals. 5 of the top 10 telcos, and a quarter of the top 100. So it really is more about scale. The higher your scale is, and obviously telco, banks, retailers that have enormous data center problems or scale benefit from the technology the most. And so it was really the creation of the big data world that happened 4 or 5 years ago with smartphones and broadband, mobile broadband, that created the data onslaught. And the more data that's getting created, it needed to be managed and needed to remove the latencies in order to get either business benefits or just cost under control of what's been happening in the data center. So it was really big data growth caused data center stress, either in slower applications or too much cost. And we solved that solution. So really into the top of the pyramid. And then it's gotten more specific towards telco as the telco industry has essentially used a lot of network analytic tools, big data analytic tools, to really understand the network intelligence that can be garnered out there to make intelligent decisions about the network, either for performance or reliability reasons. And we got into the network analytics side first, really solving those problems and helping people crunch through live data and contrasting that to data at rest, make live network decisions in a timely fashion. And then move from that really into the billing systems, where we started to really be able to create new revenue streams, improve revenue cycle times, billing cycle times, where really the money's created for the telco.
So you mentioned billing, and in the prep call we talked about real-time billing also. That, to me, sitting in a largely post-paid country implies some prepaid usage. So is the sales pitch there essentially mitigating lossage, for example?
Yeah, there's a few things. So if you look at in a prepaid world, to be able to cycle quickly through when someone runs out of data, to be able to understand that they ran out of data, immediately notify them that they ran out of data, and bill them for more data. Those kind of cycle times were missing in a lot of the billing systems because it was just taking too long to go through the application cycle. So this is being able to bill for things more quickly, or maybe missing that window completely in the past. The most recent example with a major mobile provider, one of the largest in Europe, where they were launching a turbo button for the data services for the World Cup, and literally couldn't get it through the billing system. So we did an initial implementation of $3 million, so up to $5 million now, and they estimate it's actually generating more than $100 million a year in billings that they could not bill on their old infrastructure. And it's very powerful because you don't need to rewrite applications. You can move these databases, move these applications onto flash, get the hard disk drives out of the equation, and you're creating the ability to bill more quickly or bill for things that you wouldn't be able to because of the processing and latency times. So this is out of the network latency stuff that we've done and to deal with all the time and trying to always fix in telecom. But this is really about data center application kinds of latency that were really caused by legacy storage, spinning hard disk drives, that putting storage on flash creates that opportunity that didn't exist before.
All of you have not expressly stated but implied something, which is you're able to attack the carrier market because you had other business, in a way. And I think to a company that's sort of looking very linearly, looking to crack its big chest on the operator market, that's a fairly profound implication. So I was wondering if you could speak to time to market. So, for example, you went to the GSMA and said, hey, we think we have something based on our ISP business. Time to revenue from that point. So if T equals 0, when you first approached them in 2010, when does revenue actually start flowing in?
We signed our first customer in early 2010. This was before we actually inked the agreement with the GSMA. And that was sort of our first pilot customer where we put together our first minimum viable product and actually launched it with them. And so that was with Leap Wireless here in California. And so that's what opened our eyes to mobile and said, hey, we can probably do this. We made an acquisition that had basically some technology that we were able to leverage and modify to work very well within the mobile market. So after signing with the GSMA, we actually got a pretty good sized speaking slot at Mobile World Congress. We were able to speak to a lot of industry executives that we normally would not have had access to. And so using that as a jumping off point, we were able to have a lot of discussions with carriers who were interested in dealing with the types of messaging abuse problems that they were seeing.
So you had revenue in 90 days, it sounds like. So.
We were sort of dual tracking it, but certainly it helped matters partnering with the GSMA.
Sure, okay, Dave. And again, you were coming from an incumbent sort of device management business from that time when you maybe made the first touch with the council or first touch with Metro, if you don't mind me probing. When does revenue actually start coming in? Does it start making that pitch?
Well, there are fast parts of the cycle, and there are very slow parts to the cycle as as well. At the point at which we actually will sign a contract, the time to revenue for us is actually extremely fast. So both time to value for the service provider as well as time to revenue for us. Our solution is rather unusual in that regard because it's a network that has already been deployed. It's a completely virtual Wi-Fi network that has been built out by everybody from the big retail brands through to an extreme long tail of small independent locations, everything from cliched coffee shops, independent hotels, down to public libraries, dentist's office, and we knit that together into a network. So rather than a service provider having to deploy their own Wi-Fi network, their own carrier Wi-Fi, there's this virtualized carrier Wi-Fi that's essentially out there already. So from the point at which we start working together, this network can take impact immediately that smartphones start shipping. So time to revenue for us on one hand is less than 90 days across all of our customer base. The flip side of that though is the amount of time that it takes actually to build a partnership and achieve signing. And as I alluded to earlier on, if there's a sense of urgency behind it, this thing can go very fast. So we have had, of the 20 or so customers we have today, maybe half of them, from first introduction through to signing of the contract has been less than 6 months, which is fairly fast cycle time. However, these days it's much more of a case of partnering and taking time to actually educate and work through some of the issues associated with using Wi-Fi. And as often as not, the initial reaction when we engage is worries about technical feasibility through to the big one, which is cannibalization of data revenues by using Wi-Fi. So that process, particularly amongst the larger service provider, can be one of that takes tenacity and perseverance and can be quite long.
Yeah, I mean, having described Devicescape to clients in the past, I can say specifically it takes a little to wrap your head around the notion of heterogeneous Wi-Fi supporting a carrier that's used to a very sort of consistent QoS. I'm sure that was part of the process.
Yeah, the issues are about there's an overall issue about Wi-Fi's role in general. That is something that is easing over time as many service providers are starting to introduce it into their strategies. When if we can get past that first hurdle, it tends to be things around the quality of the customer experience and how that is managed, particularly on a very essentially a random chaotic network. So we have to show how we do that, and then the public safety of data is always a hot topic for not only in the press but for service providers. So all of these things are gates that takes a certain amount of partnership and perseverance to make it through.
I'm going to flip the question around, which is more there's success, there's also failure or gotchas. In which case, and that could be part of success where you got, you're a dog that caught the bus, now the bus is dragging you. And so lessons you might have learned, things you might have done differently, for example. So Kevin, can you speak to that? So you finally caught up and the bus is dragging you. Did you think maybe I should have taken another angle? Or
Sure. So probably, our history is a little bit different, but I think sometimes typical in Silicon Valley, because we were the pioneer in the market, we were fortunate enough that we had the only solution that could solve the problem that was created. So now there's 30 startups and about $2 billion in venture capital poured into the space in the last couple of years. So lots of competitors, but I think rapid growth, really created some disruption. We grew to $100 million very quickly, at 40-50% growth rates, created all kinds of disruptions. You have to kind of reset.